So, for those of you who don't know me, I have a background. I have a PhD in ethnomusicology, which is kind of like the anthropology of music, but also relies really heavily on ethnographic um, research methods. Um, I did that for a long time, did lots of interviews, a lot of ethnographic studies about producers of jungle and drum and bass um, like 20 years ago, and how they use technology and interact with technology to make the music and DJ. Um, After that, I worked at the Yale Library for like 11 years in their music library, working as an archivist. Um, so I'm not technically a librarian, but I can explain the difference between librarians and archivists. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I pivoted over to UX with these two skill sets and worked for Thomson Reuters, SAP. I'm now working with Amazon to help them not just implement research repositories, but create knowledge management strategy, which includes a research repository, but is actually much, much more than that. Um, I say a collaborative approach to knowledge management because it's quite a bit like service design, where I'm researching the researchers, researching the stakeholders, understanding how people work, and then creating a strategy that works with that. Um, and here's just a few articles there, and I've listed my LinkedIn profile. Please connect with me, and also my website, which has all of my writings and presentations on it at the current. Yeah, so that's what I do now, by the way. I started kind of a consulting business called The Current, mostly because, things in UX have been super tough, but I know that people still need this work. They need knowledge management and this help. So um, I just offer consulting services, and I teach a course as well on Maven about knowledge management for UX so that I can keep kind of offering that assistance to folks, um, whether they're researchers or ops folks. So yes, as Phyllis said, I'm going to just go through the presentation and just kind of talk it through. If you have questions as you go, just put them in the Q&A for afterwards, and I'm happy to answer those. Okay, so how is AI reshaping the repository journey? So actually, one of the first tools that I recommended for one of the clients I was working with at the very beginning made use of AI, even before it kind of came on the scene. Generative AI came on the scene there. And because I could see that it does help you replace these kind of really manual tasks that I'll talk about later. And as we can see, we use AI for analyzing research, we use it for sharing research, and so forth. And I'll get into the specifics of what that means here. So there are three things that I'll kind of talk about today is how AI kind of helps us with taxonomy and tagging, how it drives discovery, which is a big one and one of my favorite topics, and how it really kind of stakeholder friendly kind of promotes engagement with our research. Okay, so creating that consistent taxonomy. Do we still need taxonomies? Okay, so we know that AI can be pretty good at classifying information, finding information, kind of shuffling it around. Do we still need actual taxonomies? Because everybody knows if you've created a taxonomy, it's a formidable task, right? And usually, like librarians work with taxonomies that are kind of pre-made, right, through the field of library science, the Library of Congress, and so forth. They're people who dedicate their lives and careers to creating taxonomies for libraries. And do we still need taxonomies? Yes, we do. Yes. So taxonomies are super helpful, right? They bring structure to kind of unorganized qualitative data. We know that. Um, Again, it's a solution to this kind of, weaknesses of the keyword search being kind of an older technology that we use, and making it easy to find information on the same topic, right? Because you're really, classifying things. However, manual tagging takes a lot of oversight and time. If you've ever done this with your team, you know that you could usually, when folks create like a taxonomy. So when we created the minimum viable taxonomy a few years ago with the research ops community, we started off with a huge list of options and really brutally cut that down into something that was, again, minimal. But that's really difficult to do because usually people's instinct is to create all the categories that we could possibly create, right? To make sure that we get all the information in there and classified, right? When in reality, you actually probably you don't need all that information, right? You should probably cut it down and curate it to start. Taxonomy also requires governance so that not all your users are creating tags. What I think is it kind of happened, and what I've seen and what I've heard people talking about is this practice that researchers have come to participate in, which is this like kind of tagging as analysis, kind of like, oh, well, this insight is this point, or this insight is this point. It's actually not classifying the information as much as it's tagging it so that you can find it to analyze better later. And that's a completely different use case for a taxonomy and tagging. So if you're doing that, just be aware. It's not unuseful to do, but just to be aware that that's what you're doing. Again, so this third point here, this is requiring, a common understanding of how tags will be used. So you need that governance, right? You need someone, either your ops team or someone on the ops team saying, okay, folks, how should we use tags? Let's have this conversation. How should we use taxonomy? And let's all do it in the same way. So some best practices for tagging with AI. And I think what I'll say about AI is that I am not what I would call an AI expert. I am someone who is curious and wants to look under the hood and understand how things work, right? And so in my own kind of research about how these things work, do I understand it right off the bat? No, but I understand the purpose and the use of the AI and where there might be some shortcomings there. So rather than using AI to just create a taxonomy, I recommend that you go through the motions of creating the taxonomy to understand what you currently have. A lot of these knowledge management practices that I talk about and that I teach about sound like, oh, I'm organizing my sock drawer, or it just sounds like, oh, I'm, organizing paperwork. But what I would encourage you to do and to understand is that these practices are actually synthesis. Looking at what you already have and kind of organizing it and like rearranging it and seeing it. That's a practice of synthesis and curation. So not just a rote task. The other thing that you can do, which I would definitely recommend is to create a high quality taxonomy to train the AI. And that is what I read about a lot, that makes it just like the quality of the taxonomy is much, much higher. So you want to make sure to do that. And of course, regular monitoring your AI tagging. As we know, like it makes mistakes, it does weird things, like you still have to have some kind of like quality control or some kind of oversight on how the system is working. And again, just some points here. AI won't be nearly as accurate if it's not trained with a good taxonomy. And AI can do a lot of the manual work, but it can't just take over the tagging function without strategy or supervision. I think a lot of times what this tendency is to see, and I know you all are familiar with this, to see AI as kind of this magical tool that can do the work that we don't want to do. That is true. However, the work that we must do is the strategy, right? We must keep the knowledge management strategy and kind of supervise what's going on. So our role is just changing a little bit. All right, driving discovery. So discovery is a term that's used in library and information science as being something that's distinctly different from kind of search and find. Because what librarians were focused on for so long is this kind of like keyword searching, Boolean searching, like how do we find exactly what we're looking for? Discovery isn't that. I can tell a story here, which you may be able to relate to, which is, okay, you go into a library, even if it's somewhat large, into the actual stacks of the library. All the books are organized by some kind of call number system, whether it's Library of Congress or Dewey Decimal System even. And generally in libraries, there are two ways to go retrieve a book. Say you found the book in the library catalog or you've heard of it somewhere and you look it up in the library catalog and you have the call number. And usually you can request it, right? They can put a hold on it. Library staff will go grab it for you and keep it behind the desk for you. Or you can go to the stacks and find it yourself. Definitely go look for it yourself. So in the at the Yale Library, if you've happened to ever been there, the main library, the library stacks are kind of behind closed doors in a way. Like the whole entrance to the library is just this big, supposed to be like Gothic-esque kind of cathedral looking thing, but you can't actually get to the stacks unless you swipe your ID and go through. So it's just kind of this other hidden place where it's just like, I don't know, floors and floors and floors of books. So I always recommend to go find the book yourself because, and don't look at this yet, this slide, because what you do when you go to the shelf and you find a book on the shelf is that all the books around it on the shelf are going to be the same topic, same same classification. So here, super nerding out here, so just kind of bear with me. This is a library catalog record. And we use in the US, the Library of Congress subject headings where that little yellow arrow is. And so this is a book titled Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey and American Heritage. And it gives you kind of all, the information about the book, the physical description format, bibliography, contents, and the subjects. Subjects are subject headings that are created again by the Library of Congress. And we have 3 subjects here: whiskey, Kentucky, and history. Now, if you click on any one of those linked subject headings, it's going to give you all the books that the library has on those subjects. So that is a discovery mechanism. If I take you back to the physical shelf on the book in the library, you'll be looking at this book about whiskey and you're going to see all these books around it that are just on that same topic. 9 times out of 10, whenever I've done that, I find a book that's actually more interesting or more on topic or more what I'm looking for than the original book that I came to get. That's discovery. And just as a side note, libraries are starting to create the technology to be able to look on the shelf when you're looking in the digital catalog. This is just a little blog post from the University of Michigan Library where they're creating this this widget. And of course, here it even says there's something wonderful, serendipitous about browsing the shelf, whether you're in a grocery store, bookstore, or library, right? So it is browsing technically, but it is discovery in a library because things are going to be grouped together by subject. So, oops, I'm going to back up a little bit. So when we talk about discovery with AI, it is that kind of, little personal assistant, sometimes I call it, or it's basically kind of like a librarian, right? Who's asking you what you want to look for and suggesting other things that you might want to see. That is also discovery, right? So any tool, any like repository tool, for example, that can help users discover research is going to be gold, because that's what you really want to do when you're really engaging stakeholders, right? Is you're saying, oh, here's that research you were looking for, but wait, look over here, there's some related research to the thing you're looking at. And maybe you might want to look for this too, right? So that's discovery. And any tool that offers that, I think is really, really important, because what we're trying to do, I think, with repositories, it's really no longer about like, hey, check out this long list of research that we've done, or it's going to be come, lose yourself in our research library or repository, right? That's a fantastic goal. So let's talk about stakeholder friendliness. So good research insights are awesome, but if they're not used, then they're not actually useful, right? So what you're doing, and again, I'm talking about research repositories, but I'm also talking about your knowledge management strategy. And I talk more and more about that these days than I do actual repositories, because I think what folks were starting to do is kind of equate a repository with a knowledge management strategy, but that's not your complete strategy whatsoever. I think right now, repositories, this might be perhaps one of the biggest points I'm going to say this today. Right now, repositories are really good at storing information, organizing information, and usually they're really good at making things very findable. What they're not good at is delivering insights, really engaging stakeholders, pulling them in, doing that kind of outreach. Now, librarians know this routine very, very well, because ever since I've been a librarian, and even before that, librarians know that no one comes to the library, right? There are a few select folks that like to go to the library, that's kind of their jam, they go in, but how do we reach, like in an academic library setting, for example, how do we reach out to those students who don't come to the library? What do we do here? How do we prove our value as a library to the students who, have no interest in coming in. So this is this is something librarians are very used to doing, right? And that's why we all have outreach programs at libraries where librarians will go into the classroom with students and so forth. I will also maybe mention when I was at the Yale Music Library, I did kind of an ethnographic study of the space, and I think it's worth talking about because we were in this situation in the music library where they were going to decentralize the library system, possibly move the music library off into kind of an off-site facility, which is really would have been very unfortunate. So we had to really quickly prove our value. What value do we bring to the Yale community? Well, the Yale also has a school of music, like a conservatory. And we noticed that we didn't know that much about the conservatory students. We didn't know when they were coming in the library. We just didn't know. So I organized this kind of peer-to-peer ethnography study over the better part of a year where I had school of music students interview their peers. It was like a diary study. Let's go around with them through their day. What did they do throughout their day? What does their day typically look like? Where do they spend their time? And we, again, learning about our users, right? And we found that the students only came in mostly in the evenings because during the day they were in classes and rehearsals, right? So they just weren't able to come. So we changed the services of the library to kind of meet those needs, right? To be able to offer them the things they needed. They needed more photocopiers. Sounds very simple, but that's what they came in to do. Come into the music library, make photocopies of your music, so that you can bring them home or check out a score or whatever. So we changed around our services quite a bit in the music library to meet those needs, and it was like wildly successful, and it became kind of a central hub. And I was there a few years ago and I thought, oh my gosh, it's like super, super busy all the time. So the point of this is that that's how you need to treat your knowledge management strategy. Learn about your users, learn about your stakeholders, meet them where they are, right? Maybe before you create that new shiny thing, that new Slack channel or that new repository and just expect people to come to it, learn as much as you can about where those stakeholders hang out. What tools do they use? Like what meetings do they go to? How can you meet them where they are? And then also provide what they need. You may think you know what the stakeholders need, but I think it's worth asking because we make a lot of assumptions, right, about that. So here I want to talk about, meeting stakeholders where they are. So I like this concept of an internal and external repository. Which my colleague and friend Lilith came up with. Lilith, if you're here on this call, pointed out this difference, which I think is really crucial. It's kind of what I was just goes along with what I was just talking about. And when I work with clients, often we start with an internal repository and then make it external for stakeholders. These really are two different things, right? You do want to have your kind of house in order, right? You want to make sure that you can find things yourself. I mean, there is no way that you can scale research or grow in your research maturity if you cannot find things or if you don't know what you have already, right? So you need a decent internal repository. Even if it's an Excel spreadsheet, I mean, fine, right? As long as it's, organized and findable. And then your external repository, and maybe I should have put repository in quotes here because your external repository is really your knowledge management strategy. It is what's the external facing part of that repository, right? It's kind of like the I believe Condens has the magazine feature that's new. That is what I'm talking about. Like, can you create some kind of deliverable that is kind of externally facing for stakeholders? That lets them know, we know exactly what you're looking for, we know what you want, here it is, right? You would be interested in this kind of thing. So you're making that external repository accessible and digestible for stakeholders. And I always talk about insights delivery now, right? Again, that's one of the significant things I will bring up today is not as much accessibility as delivery, right? So, and I wanted to also mention that yes, AI is excellent for search and find. That yeah, that's definitely as we know, right? If you've just used ChatGPT or any of those OpenAI tools, I mean, yeah, it's excellent. So all in all here, I guess my overall point is that yes, we need to understand which problems AI tools solve for when we're talking about knowledge management and where they might fall short. Like in a certain like problem area, right? If we're talking about taxonomy and classification, what can the tool do? What are the nuances of that tool looking under the hood? How do we make it work work the best that it can for us so that we can focus on that strategy.